We've got a fresh story to dive into today. My name is Damien, and I'm about to tell you how one ultimatum shattered a relationship that had lasted 4 years. When my fiancée stared directly into my eyes and said, "It's either them or me," she was certain she already knew the answer. After all, 4 years, I'd made it a habit to choose her side, just to keep things calm, to dodge unnecessary fights. But this time, I didn't cave. And the way I responded, it caught her completely off guard. Before you make any assumptions, though, let me take you through everything that led up to that moment, because context changes everything. I first met Liliana at a weekend hangout hosted by a mutual friend. She walked in with a group of women I hadn't seen before, all of them stunning, which definitely turned heads. As the evening picked up, someone suggested we break the ice with some fun, throwback party games. By chance, Liliana and I ended up on the same team. We weren't incredible, but we weren't bad either. We won a few rounds, lost a couple. What stood out to me wasn't our score. It was how naturally we clicked. She didn't take the games too seriously, and she had this sharp, playful wit that made everything feel easy. We moved like people who had known each other longer than just a few hours. At the end of the night, I asked for her number. She gave it to me without hesitation. For the first few weeks, we exchanged casual texts. To be honest, there wasn't any strong romantic pull in the beginning. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but all of a sudden, what had been light conversation turned into something deeper. One day we were friends, and the next, we were exploring something more. We started seeing each other more often. Before I realized it, we were in a relationship, and it felt good. The connection was effortless. What I didn't realize at the time, though, was that just because something begins smoothly doesn't guarantee the road ahead will be the same. Back then, at the very beginning, it all seemed so solid. I was sure I'd found something meaningful. But looking back now, I can see how the romance clouded my ability to see clearly. I had put her on a pedestal, brushing off anything that didn't align with the perfect version of her I'd built in my mind. The red flags were there, like how she'd get visibly upset when I voiced a different opinion, or how she'd shut down and go silent over small disagreements. But I ignored those moments. I chalked them up to passion or personality quirks. The truth is, love can trick you into rewriting what you're seeing. You reframe problems as cute habits. You justify behavior that should raise concerns. I did all of that. As our relationship progressed, I started to recognize a pattern in how her affection worked. Liliana's love came with conditions, invisible ones, but conditions nonetheless. If I went along with her suggestions, stayed agreeable, and let her take the lead, she was affectionate, cheerful, and warm. It felt like I was doing everything right. But the moment I disagreed or offered a different point of view, everything would shift. She'd grow cold, emotionally distant. Sometimes she'd act like I wasn't even in the room. Other times, she'd toss out biting sarcasm or manipulative comments that made me question my own perspective. I didn't see it clearly at the time, but I was training myself to avoid conflict. I started thinking, is it worth the argument? And more often than not, I decided it wasn't. Peace seemed more important than honesty. So I stopped speaking up. I found myself agreeing with things I didn't fully believe in, just to keep things smooth. I told myself that was compromise, that it was just part of being in a relationship. But what I was really doing was silencing my own voice. And with every little surrender, she gained more control that looked a lot like love on the surface. Here's the part people don't always talk about. Sometimes control comes gift-wrapped in affection. And I love you. And I just want what's best for us. And you don't realize what's happening until you're knee-deep, wondering when exactly you stop being honest with yourself. That's where I ended up. On the outside, things looked stable. We both had full-time careers. Liliana worked in healthcare administration, and I was managing operations at a corporate firm. Monday through Friday, we handled our business. But Saturdays were my escape. Every Saturday morning, I co-hosted a podcast with two of my closest friends. What started out as a casual group chat idea had become something I genuinely looked forward to each week. We weren't viral or famous by any means, but it was growing, and more importantly, it gave me purpose. It was a space where I could express myself, bounce ideas around, be vulnerable, and laugh out loud. It was a therapy I didn't need a copay for. We covered everything: relationships, current events, personal stories, culture. Nothing was off limits. But Liliana never really supported it. At first, I brushed it off. She'd roll her eyes when I mentioned it or say she was too tired to listen. If she did listen, she'd smile politely when I told her what we discussed, but I could tell her interest was shallow at best. The enthusiasm wasn't mutual. At first, I told myself it was just a difference in interests. I was passionate about the podcast. She wasn't into it. That's normal, right? But over time, her disinterest shifted into discomfort, then into something much more deliberate. Anytime I brought up the guys I hosted with, her energy changed. Her shoulders would tense, her smile would stiffen. If I invited her to one of our get-togethers, she'd always ask who was going. The moment she learned either of them would be there, she'd suddenly remember she had something else to do. Initially, I chalked it up to a clash in personalities. Maybe she didn't click with their humor, or felt left out when we got into fast-paced banter. But then I noticed it went deeper. After any hangout with the guys, her mood would dip. Her text became short. If I messaged her while we were out, I'd get nothing or a cold one-liner. And when I got home, she'd start with vague, probing questions. What were you guys talking about? Like she was trying to read between lines that weren't even there. But when I canceled plans or didn't bring the podcast up at all, her whole vibe changed. She was lighter, suddenly affectionate, suddenly available. That's when the truth started to form in the back of my mind. It wasn't about the podcast. It was about influence. My co-hosts knew me long before she did. They saw through me, held me accountable, challenged me. And she didn't like that. She couldn't shape that part of me, and that made it a threat. I think deep down, she realized that as long as those friendships existed, there was a version of me she couldn't fully mold. They kept me grounded. They reminded me who I was. And that independence, that refusal to be completely consumed by her world, that's what really bothered her. Looking back now, it's clear. When someone starts trying to cut you off from the people who lift you up, that's not love. That's control wearing a sweet face. And it took me too long to see it for what it was. Meanwhile, the podcast itself was gaining momentum. Our audience grew, feedback poured in, and for the first time in years, I felt fired up creatively. We got a few brand mentions, and the content started to resonate beyond our small circle. I'd come home on a high, excited to share progress with Liliana, but her reaction was always lukewarm at best. At worst, dismissive. She stopped pretending to care. Her responses were barbed. You talk to them more than you talk to me, or is anyone even listening to this? But the one that hit me hardest was, do you really need to give every Saturday to them? That one stuck, because Saturdays weren't just podcast days. They were my space to be myself. Eventually, I stopped sharing updates with her. Not out of spite, but because it was draining to see my excitement met with indifference or was passive-aggressive guilt. It didn't feel safe to talk to her about something that brought me joy. And that silence between us, it became a slow poison. The more I held back, the more distant we grew. Conversations turned into arguments. Everything became a trigger. During one of those endless back-and-forth fights, she brought it up again. She wanted me to scale back the podcast, said we needed more quality time, tried to pitch it as a fair compromise. But I wasn't fooled. I told her, calmly and clearly, this is the one part of my life that feeds my soul. I won't give it up just because you don't like who I'm around. That was the turning point. She looked stunned. She wasn't used to that kind of pushback from me. We were engaged by then, neck deep in wedding plans. But instead of bonding us, the pressure brought all the cracks to the surface. Fights came more frequently. Decisions turned into debates. And then, one day, in the heat of yet another argument, she dropped the bomb. It's me or them. You choose. She said it like a final move in a chess game she thought she'd already won. But I didn't flinch. I looked her in the eye and said, I'm not giving up the only thing that keeps me grounded just to keep things smooth between us. She took off her ring right there, told me I'd never hear from her again. And I didn't argue. I just told her, you should have thought twice before forcing a choice you assumed I'd be too afraid to make. She left that night expecting me to chase her. I didn't. Days passed. No messages. No calls. Then finally, she broke the silence, accusing me of letting my friends ruin our relationship, of choosing them over her, of never loving her if I could walk away so easily. I listened, not because I believed it, but because I was floored by how distorted her version of events had become. It was like we had lived two separate stories. In Hayes, I was disloyal. In mine, I had finally chosen myself. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I just hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. That call marked a new beginning for me, a season of clarity. I started remembering all the moments I used to overlook. I saw the control, the quiet demands, the way my voice had slowly faded out of my own relationship. And I realized something hard but honest. Some people don't want a partner. They want a follower. I wanted a teammate. She wanted obedience. Months later, she reached out again, said she'd done some self-work, said she missed me, said she'd changed. And I won't lie, those words pulled at something inside me. I didn't shut the door right away. We talked, gave it time. For a while, things seemed different. But some changes come too late. She started tuning in more. At first, it gave me hope, like maybe we could rebuild something honest this time, something healthier. For a while, it even felt possible. But little by little, the old dynamic snuck back in. Not loud or obvious, just those quiet, familiar signals. That subtle guilt trip when I picked a podcast session over a weekend with her. Those just curious questions that felt more like quiet surveillance and care. This time, though, I didn't miss the signs. I didn't convince myself to wait and see. I ended it before it turned into another cycle. Because here's what I know now. Sometimes life gives you the same lesson twice to make sure it sticks. And one of the hardest truths. Real love should never feel like a test you keep failing. It should feel like ease. Like home. Like breath. Not tension. Not theater. Not a place where you have to shrink yourself to fit in. Once you experience peace, real, grounded peace, you can't pretend comfort lives in chaos. You can't go back to walking on eggshells and calling it passion. So if you're still here with me, thank you. Truly, I want to leave you with a few things I learned the hard way. First, don't confuse staying quiet for being kind. Love that silences you isn't love. It's erasure. I spent too long thinking that being the bigger person meant avoiding conflict, keeping things calm, swallowing my truth. I didn't realize that what I was actually doing was silencing my own needs to keep someone else from feeling uncomfortable. That's not peacekeeping. That's self-abandonment. Second, don't fall for the cycle. It's not about the apology. It's about what happens next. People can say the right words after every storm, but if the behavior doesn't shift, the apology is just a disguise. I wanted to believe her words so badly that I ignored the evidence right in front of me. Change isn't promised in what someone says in regret. It's proven in what they do consistently. And last, believe what people show you. The first time, the third time, every time. I kept hoping the version of her I loved would show up for good. But that version only existed in my imagination. The real her kept revealing herself in moments where I stepped out of line, where I asserted myself, chose myself. And every time I did, the mask slipped a little more. If love feels like a competition for approval, if it feels conditional or earned, then it's not love. It's control with a romantic filter. So let me ask you something honest. If you were in my place, 4 years deep, someone you love standing in front of you and saying, it's either me or the thing that lights you up, what would you choose? Because I won't pretend it's simple, but I will tell you it's necessary. And maybe you needed to hear that today. If any part of this felt familiar, if it hit you in that quiet place you've been trying to ignore, do me a favor. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to feel less alone right now. Sometimes, all it takes is knowing your instincts aren't lying to finally walk away. Thanks for being here.